Good day, ladies and gentlemen, capsuleers. I'm Yudarion. Welcome back to another one of these. The last video was fairly well received, and there was many requests to get a few extra samples in. So I thought I'd record a second going through sample thingy. So let's start right away. What we have here is quite a clear example of what I would classify as nucleoli. As you can see, it's a clear round green staining that overlaps with holes in the sample, which you can see here, so that's a very clear press. Now if we look at just the green within the cytoplasm, you see that's very evenly stained, so we can also check nucleus as that's evenly stained. Now if you look at the background, it's quite vague staining within the cytoplasm, so I'm not going to check anything else. What I am going to do is check cell-to-cell variations, because if you check up here you see that there's not really any sign of nucleoli. Here not, there not, so let's go ahead and check it. Well, as you can see, a few people thought the staining was not fake enough. As you can see in the examples, the staining should be quite noticeable. The main example image here is a bit less intense, but it's still way more intense than what you see in this example, so keep that in mind. What people have done here is I think the collection of green staining were exactly that, collections in small specks. As you can see in the example, that's not really what's it. You can confuse it for this one because there's multiple small specks that are closer together in the form of a ball, but these are really balls instead of collection of speckles. So let's go to the next one. Loading is a bit slow today. But it's an interesting one. There's a lot of nucleus parts, the blue staining, outside of well, anything really. So let's check this. This is very vague staining. We have fake cytoplasm staining here. Very low-key green staining. Let's lock that down. There's not really holes to be observed. And there's this strange green staining around. There's the edge, a bit in the middle of nowhere. And this across a strange red line. This is definitely an abnormal sample. And if I had to guess on this part and this part, I would almost go with rods and rings. If you look at the examples, it does look a bit like this. But it's not present in the entire sample, so we can also check cell-to-cell variations and hit submit. The other option here would have been strands, I guess. Oh, it glitched out. We're back now, and let's check the next sample. This seems to be a very clear example of Focalization center. We see the holes, which is filled with small speckles, which very much looks like this one, so much that we can confidently click it, actually not anything else. What some people might think is that because of the collection of specks you should check nuclear bodies, but because they're overlapping with the holes, as you can see in those parts, you should check them anyway as Focalization center, because the nuclear bodies are just round specks that are seen throughout the blue nucleus. And let's go to the next one. 66%, yeah. Well, this is a very clear example of a nucleoplasm at least. And if we check solely this one, it's quite dense, too dense for vesicles, I think. We're gonna check cytoplasm there. Let's take a quick look. No, nothing else there really going on. If the green forms no structure and it's quite dense enough, it's probably cytoplasm. If it forms no structure and it's a bit spread out, it's most likely vesicles, so keep that in mind. And it seems to be a good example of an agressum. As you can see in the examples, it manifests itself in a sort of oval ball, right to the side of the nucleus. So that's a very clear example of that one. We don't seem to have one in all examples, so we're going to check cell-to-cell variations. The inside of this cell is quite stained, but some of the others are very vague. So the question is, do we have to check the nucleus there? Yeah, it is clear enough. If I check the intensity of the example, it should be. And then we have the cytoplasm part. In this example we really have a bit of speckles to be observed, so I'm going to check vesicles there. And here's also some specks to be observed, so I'm going to go with that selection. I think a few people are going to select cytoplasm for this part, because it's a bit more dense there. I was the first. Well, that solves that for now. Oh, well, it's a beautiful example of cytoskeleton, one of the most easily identifiable structures in cytoplasm. There's no nucleus to be observed, but I see something strange going on there. No, it's just a collection of cytoplasm. And what do we have there? No, nothing too weird. And let's move on to the next one. Oh, it was one of those check images. That's nice. An interesting one. There's a Psychokinetic Bridge there, in the middle of nowhere with green staining. Which is very interesting because the images are 3D, but we get 2D images because otherwise it would have been a bit different. And we can't see any connection between cells, so I'm in doubt if I should check Cytokinetic Bridge here. There is green staining to be observed, and that is something that needs to be there in order for it to be. Interesting one. Let's analyze the other part first. It's fairly even staining. There's maybe a bit of a hole observed there, but it's not very pronounced. I think a lot of people would select nucleoplasm here, but I'm gonna go with nucleus because it's quite vague, the staining, and there's no real overlap with holes in the blue. We have some vesicles going on there and there. The overall rest seems to be quite dense cytoplasm. The edges is an interesting one. I'm gonna go with cell junctions there. If you look at the example, sometimes they are prolonged green staining, but they also manifest themselves in very short edges. If you check the HPA website, Protein Atlas, an example, there's a more clear example of this, which you should keep in mind. And Cytokinetic Bridge, I'm just gonna check the press abnormal sample just in case, and leave it at that. First again, so no feedback from other players just yet. Well, there's a very clear example of intermediate filaments. If you check these examples, it becomes quite clear why. It's a quintessential example. We also have cytoskeleton bridge here, but there's no green staining to be observed in between, so we can rule that out and just submit it like this. Now the reason it's not this one is because this is more combined speckles that form a structure in the form of what they call a spider web, which is often more pronounced around the nucleus as a thick green staining, and at the edges at a spread out structure. While what we see here in the image is a clear, well, almost one-on-one example of the intermediate filament, so keep that in mind. Moving on. Well, this is an interesting one. The intensity near the nucleus is stronger, it seems, on the outside. The question is if this is cytoplasm or endoplasmic reticulum. We check the red and hold the images checked on the examples. This seemed to be less struck out throughout the entire cytoplasm. I would think I would go with this one. Now let's check the inside. There's definitely holes in it, but if it's not present enough, we should not check it. But in this case, yeah, difficult one. I'm gonna check it anyway. Yeah. Interesting. 66% vote for the other. This is a very vague one. Difficult one. Let's check only the green. Well, this is definitely not vesicles, but this part looks like it quite much. Vesicles, not really vesicles. And it's quite vague. If I had to choose, it would be between mitochondria and endoplasmic. Really here, it's both very vague. Going from this part, I'm gonna hit the vesicles, mitochondria, and cell-to-cell variation. It's a tricky one. Let's see. Cytoplasm, well, really? No. Nuclear bodies, well, if you check the inside, yes, on one hand. On the other hand, there's no very pronounced of these bodies. If you check the examples, they're often a bit more bright, but it could be. And Fabrice, now that's more clustered, often in between holes with cells. So it's a difficult one, that one. Let's see what it brings later on. Okay. Well, this is nucleus. It's quite dense out there, but not too dense. So let's check the exam. Yeah, I'm gonna go with vesicles here. Okay, next one. Interesting structures, definitely some actin filaments going on at the edges. We see nucleoplasm clearly in the middle. And in between we have a very straightforward green staining. But some of the green is a bit more bright. I'm doubting between vesicles and cytoplasm in between here. Check the example quickly. I would go with cytoplasm here. Let's submit it. First, it's always a pity if you're the first on one hand, because you don't get any feedback, but on the other hand it's also funny to see what other people might bring in the future. Yeah, there's not really much going on here. We have some staining in the cytoplasm, but it is, though uniform, not very pronounced. Not clear nearly enough. So I'm gonna leave it at nucleoplasm right there. Again, first to put something there. That's interesting. That's, well, there's some clear holes in the blue, and there's some clear holes in the green, so I'm gonna be fairly confident that that is nucleoplasm. The cytoplasm is doing weird things here. They're very, there's a whole lot of green speckles, but they're mostly individual speckles, so I'm gonna go with vesicles there. Yeah, people went for cytoplasm, but I really think it should be denser in order for it to be that. It is an interesting one, because at first sight you would see the holes in it there and there, but it's also coming straight through the nucleus, the blue part. So I'm gonna go with nuclear speckles there. If you check the examples, you can see that the green is protruding through the blue nucleus, and that is some clear cytoplasm at the edges that is bright enough on some of the parts to be classified as such. Now the rest of the cell, you check it, it's fairly evenly stained, so I'm gonna go with nuclear speckles and nucleus. I doubt many people will do the same there, but it's just how we roll. And again on the first there, so interesting one again. First reaction would be fibrillar center here, but it's not bright enough, really. But it overlaps with the holes. It's a difficult one. Either this one or nuclear speckles right here. Let's check the examples for cross-reference. Yeah, this image is reminiscent of it. And I'm gonna go with fibrillar center. Nuclear speckles, it should be definitely a bit brighter. I think that's one of the defining factors there. 25% and negative. Well, negative needs less blue. Again, an interesting one. I mean, stuff like this can mostly be ignored, but in the cytoplasm we have some green staining going on. And the question is, what is it? Well, it's not an agressum, because it's too spread out for that. It's maybe this one. And we also have endoplasmic, but that's often stretched more throughout the cell. Well, this is not. The other option is of course vesicles, but there's not enough individual specs for that, so I'm gonna go with cytoskeleton, intermediate filaments, and check cell-to-cell variations, because not every cell cytoplasm has the structure in it. Community is quite torn on this one. Okay. And we're back again. It crashes sometimes because the servers are under some strain, because people are way too enthusiastic about this stuff. Let's do a few more before we quit. We have evenly staining throughout the entire cell here. As you can observe, there's holes in the blue marker, and that overlaps perfectly with nucleoplasm. If you check the examples here, it's almost one-on-one on some of these. So let's check that one. The the cytoplasm that we can observe here is not nearly bright enough to warrant cytoplasm, I think, so I'm just gonna leave it at nucleoplasm. And that was the first. Let's do two more. That is an interesting one, because this one has almost no holes, and these others clearly have some. So let's quickly check the blue. There is some hole overlap here, as you can easily see if we check the blue-green, so it's gonna be nucleoplasm, but clear self-evaluation because of the intensity switch between two cells right there. Yep. Okay, last one. Oh, that's a beautiful one actually. There's definitely some rope-like green staining going on, but also quite a bit of individual. This looks quite much like microtubule ends, if I had to guess. Which also manifests itself a bit in the form of speckles, sometimes, often going on into a bit longer strands. I'm fairly confident it's that one. And the overlap in the nucleus, I don't think it warrants an selection in the nucleus, just because it overlaps in this case, because it's so spread out throughout the entire structure. So I'm gonna leave it at just microtubule ends there. Yeah, I thought people would select focal adhesion here because of the strands. To differentiate it is not too easy, but it's often a bit more on the edge. If you can see this image, a bit more on the edge protruding, while the microtubule ends, it says sometimes only at the ends, and if you check the examples, it's more throughout the entire structure. So that's the reasoning for checking microtubule ends. Well guys, I hope it was a bit useful again for you people. Maybe I'll make a third part if there's enough people that would like to see such thing. In the meantime, have a pleasant day, fly safe.